This video is sponsored by me. That's right, the weekend retreat is happening again this year from the 11th to the 13th of July, and you don't want to miss it because this year we're studying Ecclesiastes. That's right, the book that I haven't been able to stop talking about or thinking about for the last 5 years. We're putting aside a whole weekend to look at it. So email lambda.retreats@gmail.com if you're interested. It's from the 11th to the 13th of July. Whether you're a deeply committed Christian and you have been for years and you want a based environment to have those honest conversations, or maybe you're an atheist, but there's been some part of you been saying, I should give God a chance, or perhaps you're just feeling lonely and isolated in the modern world. Either way, email lambda.retreats@gmail.com and come and join us. I've invited some of the sharpest minds of the internet to compete in a competition of intellect, cunning, and taste. Welcome, Ed Dutton. I'm throwing down the gauntlet. Do you accept the challenge?
Yes, I think I do. Yes.
Well, as you can see, this year I've massively overcomplicated the format. You will be traveling out from Lambda's Landing, facing various foes, competing in intellectual challenges, and it's basically the same thing as last year, where we're going to be discussing topics of interest, but I've put some more flair on top of it. Your goal is to get as much gold in your treasury as you can. You'll collect gold in the pouch as you go outwards. There's more gold the further you go, but you could risk losing it all at any moment. So your first decision is which way you want to go. So you could go to the Dunes of Dishonesty, which is for topics related to culture, the Biased Bridge for topics related to society, the East Crossroads for topics related to knowledge, or towards the Standing Stones for topics relating to ethics.
I'm interested in the Standing Stones but I don't think I want to go there. But they remind me, what's those stones in Oxfordshire, the Rurite Stones or something? What are they called? The stones intrigue me, but no, I'll go to society. What was that one? The Biased Bridge.
The Biased Bridge. Very well. Let's set you traveling towards that, and let's see if you encounter anything untoward en route. Oh, you're almost at the Biased Bridge, but who should pop out on your way but Shadowblade? Death approaches in silence as the black-clad figure emerges from hiding, weapons held with the casual confidence of a master killer. Are you quaking in your boots, Ed?
Well, it looks like a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle with a hood on.
I need to give credit to Poe. Do you know Poe the person?
I do. I know Poe. She designed the cover for one of my books.
Did she?
Well, yes, the Naked Classroom, the evolutionary psychology of your time at school.
Well, I recruited her to do all the art for this project as well, and as you can see, she's done a superb job. Okay, so the Shadowblade is going to present you with a challenge. We will discuss it briefly. I will score your response according to various metrics secretly in the background, and then some dice rolling will happen. And you will see whether you've defeated the enemy. So the question is, can a society exist without hierarchy?
I think that it is, if you're talking about a human society, it is within our evolutionary psychology to always create hierarchy. We have 5 moral foundations that have kind of how desirous we are towards them is built into us, and some of these relate to being able to climb the hierarchy, i.e. individually oriented foundations, and some of them relate to being group oriented, so that our group defeats other groups. But nevertheless, it is built into us to want to create hierarchies, because that a chain of command is how a society, which must ultimately battle other societies, or even just predators or other animals, it needs to be organized, and that militates in favor of a hierarchy. So I would think that even within something even within a friendship group, there's probably going to develop some kind of hierarchy. It's just natural.
Are you saying that hierarchy is
It's
an
intrinsic to
evolutionary?
the human mind. We
It's an
will
adaptive meme.
It's an adaptive thing. We will always develop, even children's groups, whatever. We will always, where there are three people, there's probably some kind of hierarchy, which is probably why three people is a quorum in political organizations. So that there will be a hierarchy. It's almost a contradictory question. There is no society without it.
I remember last year you described some of my questions. I can't remember what word you used. You said it was that they were sophomoric or something like this. That, I think what you were.
I don't recall what I said, but I'm saying that it is, humans are pack animals. A pack is a hierarchy, and so it is the essence of humanity. If you're talking about human societies, or indeed any society, there will always be a hierarchy. And that those groups that try to say, well, let's break down the hierarchies, like the communists or whatever, all they do is create a new hierarchy with them at the top of it, which is why they do it.
What causes the drive for people to dislike hierarchy? If it's so adaptive, what leads people to so enjoy the idea of tearing them down?
Because those people, you're going to get certain kinds of people who you're going to get variance within a group in terms of psychological traits, and you're going to, and there's some evolutionary benefit to having that variance, because there's evidence that geniuses, let's say, combined optimum antisocial traits with very high intelligence. So you're going to get the variance in the group is therefore maintained, and some people within those group therefore will not be positive to the group, but that's compensated for by those that are positive to the group that have antisocial traits. They'll just be antisocial, and so those people will see higher, will feel jealous, they'll feel resentful, they'll be individualistic and selfish, they'll want power, they'll perhaps be too cowardly to ultimately play for power in the normal hierarchical system. And so it makes sense that the hierarchy and symbols of it are symbols of that which oppresses them and which insults their sort of semi-narcissistic need for power and their entitlement and whatever. And so they resent those things and they want to tear them down. And in that context of chaos, people like them will get a sense of satisfaction, even if they can't get power, that the hierarchy has been torn down. And in the chaos, they may be able to, some of them themselves, obtain power.
Could we soften the question a bit and ask whether there's such a thing as a hierarchy that is too rigidly enforced, too strong of a hierarchy? Can it become a problem?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. I think you could argue that what a lot of Plato or whatever, what they're talking about is an optimum level of hierarchical rigidity, and an optimum level even of caste, of a caste system that keeps society stable, where it is rigid enough that it doesn't degenerate into chaos all the time, but it is open enough that talented people from lower classes, let's say, can enter into the hierarchy, into higher levels of the hierarchy, and that useless people that happen to be born into the higher classes can descend down. And if it's too rigid, then that can be a problem, because it can lead to people failing to support the hierarchy and rising up against it and tearing it down. But if it's not rigid enough, then you just get chaos and you get a degeneration into microcosms, and microcosms are more likely to be dominated by a large cooperative hierarchical polity. So there's some optimum level of, like, you could say the same thing with democracy. If everyone can vote and everyone's vote is equally balanced, then you could argue that inevitably you're going to get a bureaucracy to administer everything, and the bureaucracy is going to be left wing, and it's going to end up basically taking away the wealth of the richer people, and then the richer people are going to start not to support democracy. But if you have a system where nobody can have a say, where nobody feels they can have any kind of say, then they get resentful and they'll want to tear down the hierarchy. So there has to be a balance between the two.
It strikes me that there's something deeply virtuous about somebody having power, even acknowledged power, and yet choosing not to use it for their own personal benefit.
But perhaps they're more forward thinking than that, and they know that if they do use it too obviously and conspicuously for their own personal benefit, then they will create resentment and they will be torn down. And so it's better to think ahead and sort of think in the now really, and play the long game and seem to not use it for your personal benefit, whereas in reality, by not doing so, you're kind of using it for your personal benefit because you're making sure that you don't upset people and your alliances are maintained and you stay in power.
How much of morality is related to thinking in the long term rather than the short term?
Well, I suppose you could argue that if if it is true that your impulse is to be self-serving, so if one's natural impulse is to get angry with somebody and smack them around the face, and so if that's the case, then the ability to control those feelings through effortful control and to not do so would generally be considered pro-social. And within certain limitations, a lot of what we kind of mean by morality is something to do with being maybe pro-social, at least for a pack species, perhaps not always. Perhaps there are boundaries to this. Like we might say to ourselves, the moral thing is to kill members of other groups, which is antisocial, in order to assist your own group, which is pro-social or whatever. So we create a sort of moral line that you don't pass beyond. Or family, you don't grass on your family, the kind of East End moral code. But there is a degree to which being simply utterly selfish is always considered immoral. And interestingly, there was a study I was reading that found that people that are just libertarians, essentially, whose attitude is to do whatever you want, tend to be low on all 5 moral foundations. So that would imply that the opposite of morality is do what thou wilt, free for all, pure liberty.
Yeah, I'm detecting in your answer that your view is morality is a social construct. It's something that we imagine and has purely sort of historical, evolutionary, societal, cultural roots. Is that true? Do you not think
if it has evolutionary roots, it's not. You can't really say it's a social construct because this means that we have strong cognitive biases in us in relation to certain kinds of morality, and
it sits somewhere between a evolutionary and a cultural force, but in your mind, it doesn't have any kind of strong ontological reality to it.
What you're asking me, what's sort of like the moral argument, if you think that God has ordained that we should behave in certain specific ways.
Oh, no, I'm just interested.
If he has, then the morality of Christianity has gone through some hoops, hasn't it? Because the morality of the morality of Christianity, the morality of the Old Testament is very much group oriented. It's the group oriented moral foundations, except when the Hebrews are fighting for freedom from slavery, then it's kind of individually oriented. And then when Christianity comes along and the people are middle class rather than upper class who are Christians, then it's individually oriented. And again, it's all about the kind of stuff that wokeness is about now. And then when they get into power, then they start drawing upon the Old Testament to justify being group oriented. So because it's adaptive for that group, i.e. the Christian group, to be individually oriented when they're not in power, and thus to virtue signal, essentially, and purity signal their way into power. And the Protestants do the same thing in relation to the Catholics, and then group oriented when they're in power.
I think it's a very good observation. I've noticed the same thing. People, Christian or otherwise, making lots of arguments about how, if they are the out group at that moment, their morality suddenly becomes all about protecting the out group, and as soon as they're in power, then the morality becomes about enforcing normative moral behavior.
Like the obvious example is the left. The left were the out group in the 50s, and so they would go on about free speech. Now the right are the out group, so they go on.
About free speech. Yeah,
I
agree with you.
And I think it's happening. I think that a backlash is happening, and these backlashes always go too far. And so, in the same way that now you might get people getting into an argument in a pub with a random person because that person is left wing and being asked to leave because they're causing a fight or whatever. You can imagine that being completely reversed in the 50s or 40s because you've said something bad about Jesus, and you can imagine that in the future it will reverse again. So yeah, I think it's in that sense. I think morality is subjective, and not just that, but it's what's the word? It is our own personal moralities will change according to the situations that we're in. So if we go through a period of our lives where we feel excluded, we tend to become more left wing and and also sometimes more religious. So our morality changes according to where our situation is, which is why young people are often more left wing, because they feel excluded and from the broader power system.
I think that the observations you're making about the way that people behave and the beliefs that they hold are all right on the money. I think where I disagree, though, is that that is a ironclad proof that there isn't a morality. Just because somebody believes something for a badly motivated reason doesn't mean that they haven't accidentally stumbled
Well,
into
what would if there was?
true belief.
If you're saying there's the one true morality,
Yeah.
Then what verifies that as being true?
It's a different question whether or not we can know it, but I still cling on to the belief that it is out there.
But what makes it true then? How would you know it was true?
I think we'd have to get into a theological discussion to answer that question.
Fine.
So I think we have revealed morality, verified historically through Jesus' resurrection, and amongst other evidences. So I think you're probably right that we can't intellectually reach it on our own, and gut feel maybe sort of unreliable. People have a tendency to
that's just a fallacy.
self-justify.
That's just a logical fallacy. I mean, that's what you're saying.
Go on.
You're saying it's basically an appeal to instinct or intuition or something.
I was putting a caveat that I don't think instinct is a good way to get to it.
It's revelation. I have felt the mysterium tremendum et fastum.
Revelation in a much more direct sense, in that we've been given the Bible and we can verify it. It's a more historically rooted ethic. It's not revelation in the form that Jesus came to me in a dream and explained to me the way I should behave.
But that's what the people in the Bible say. The people, a number of them, they say, God appeared to me and God said this. God appeared to Moses and said, these are the 10 Commandments.
Yeah, and I think if you were in the position that you had a direct revelation like that, you'd have to ask yourself whether you believed it.
But that allows me to say, God appeared to me and said that I am right about my answer to your question.
I think
you can't refute
that. There is a very subjectivist corner to my views of morality, which is that if somebody was genuinely deluded, so suppose they had some manic episode or they had a vision that was purely the result of mental illness, and then they acted on it and did something that was objectively heinous, I don't think that person is I don't think it's right to view that person as morally culpable, because they, within their own frame, were acting according to genuine belief.
Are they morally culpable or morally blamable, or can they be morally held responsible in a good way if they have a religious vision and they then do something good? Or should we say, no, that wasn't their fault, that was because of the vision?
I guess just to kind of draw a slight distinction between two things here. One is, how should society behave? How should a justice system be implemented? And then that's, I think, a different question to how does God think about somebody having acted good versus evil? And so,
but I think that's a really interesting question. If you have a vision, that's a kind of a form of, or you hear voices that aren't there. Okay, you might think, okay, God is real and God is revealing himself to me, and fine. But if we put that aside, you have a person that has a vision that says, go and kill somebody or something. I am the Lord, go and do it. And you have a person that says, go and do this lovely, kind act. I am the Lord. Go and do it.
Yeah.
And a lot of Christians would claim that they act on a kind of witness evangelism, whereby God is moving them to behave in a certain way. And on the one person who's done the bad thing, we say, oh, he's not morally culpable, he's gone crazy, he's got schizophrenia or something. But then on the other person, because it's a positive thing they've done, we say, aren't they a jolly good chap? Shouldn't we say, no, it's nothing to do with them. Don't give them any blame for it at all. It was because they were psychotic.
I think from a sort of moral evaluation of how should we think about their behavior, as in, was it sinful or not? If they had a delusion and did something terrible, but they really believed the delusion and thought that they were doing the good thing, I don't think that's blameworthy. However, as a society, I think we should punish people for doing things that break our rules. So if you murder somebody, then, I mean, I'd say we should have the death penalty for murder. So I think you could simultaneously think, well, this poor person was deluded and what they did was insanity, but I actually think you should still punish them for what they did regardless. So I kind of separate those two questions.
That's an interesting point. So you should remove them from the gene pool, essentially. Just get rid of them.
I'd say we should punish people for the actions, and we should counsel them according to their intentions. Maybe that's the way to put it.
Interesting.
All right, let's. I'll tell you what. Let's see if you've won this this battle. It's gone on a little longer than I intended, but I was enjoying the conversation. So I've dialed up your potential winnings here. Let's see. Victory.
Oh, good.
Well done. Okay, let's go back to the map. Let's travel onwards and get to the Bias Bridge. Here we go. So you reach the Biased Bridge, and you've got 2 routes to go here. You've got 30 gold in your pouch now, but it doesn't count towards your final score unless you get it back into the treasury, which requires going back to where you started. Or you can carry on to the paradoxical planes, which is for questions about identity, or the time pools for questions about organization.
Well, that just means that just, unless the treasury is central to everything, then that means that the whole system is biased in favor of you moving a certain way around the map and ignoring.
Well, you can actually teleport back to the landing, and the gold you get increases as you go outwards. So it's
clever! How clever! So it's a sort of, I see.
It's like a gambling, how far do you go when you turn back.
Behind me? What's behind me if I go back over the bridge of bias?
Oh, well, if you head back to the landing, you can stick your gold straight back into Lambda's landing, and you've got it banked. And then you could head out a different direction. You could go to the East Crossroads or the Standing Stones. Head wherever you like.
Okay, well, I'll bank it, and then I'll go to the Standing Stones, please.
Okay, great. Let me stick you back in the landing. I will bank the gold and towards the Standing Stones, which is ethics.
Right.
All right. We were already talking a bit about ethics, so maybe we can have this. Oh, I don't know. We'll see how it goes. Maybe this discussion will be quicker.
Well, okay. Well, then I'll go to the supposition swamp.
Yeah. Okay. Let's do that. The supposition swamp, which is questions related to. Remind me. The supposition swamp. Oh, natural world.
Okay.
This should be interesting. Okay. Okay. Well, maybe yes. Let's do this. Oh, terrible news, Ed. There's been another beast has crossed your path, and this time, it's a spooky corpse called Drowger, whose dead eyes alight with malevolent intelligence as the ghoul spirit seizes you, and the ghoul asks you a question that should be right up your street. Is natural selection wasteful or efficient? Is it not a meaningful question?
Well, not really, no. I mean, natural
Okay,
selection
let me switch the question. Does understanding nature diminish its wonder? People will say,
no, I think it does. No, I don't think. It's like asking. It's two different modes of thought, both of which are adaptive. So one mode of thought is to make sense of things. It is adaptive for us as a species to make sense of our environment, so we can better control it and ultimately are more likely to pass on our genes. That's adaptive. It's adaptive to understand nature, but presumably it's also adaptive to have a general feeling that of wonder. And what is wonder? It's a feeling, often a feeling that we can't control, a feeling that will just come upon us. That I mentioned earlier, I think I might have done the mysterium tremendum et fascinans. So that kind of almost religious feeling that everything somehow makes sense. And that can be induced in us by nature. And that's why poets will write their odes to nature or whatever. Why does nature induce this in us? I guess because we can never quite understand anything, and nature is symbolic of that, or nature is our evolutionary match, and it can make us very happy. And when we're very happy, our instincts are induced, and one of those instincts can be kind of religious experience. It can make us dimly aware of death. This can induce the instinct of religious experience. It can make us extremely happy and induce a lot of pleasure. And if that's overwhelming, then that kicks off another process that we have. We have quiescence, where we're very relaxed, and we have basically being hyper aroused. And we oscillate between the two. And if one bit goes too far, then you can the other one hits in, and this can lead to a sort of weird sense of religious joy. Sometimes in extreme cases, you because our instinct is to over detect agency, we will have a sense of agency and of something greater than ourselves, while in a sense of joy, or in a sense of fear, while involved in nature. So I think it doesn't diminish its wonder, because those are quite separate things. It's like saying, if you understand the chemical nature of love, when people are in love, they're more likely to believe in God, and they're more likely to believe that life has eternal meaning. And one of the reasons for that is that there's a specific hormone that is released called something called rehiprodrone or something, and that is released when you are in love, and it is also it makes the world seem meaningful, and so on, and so I think they're separate issues. So and I think that if you feel that being aware of how things work reduces your level of wonderment, then there's probably some underlying psychological reason why you're not feeling the wonderment, such that you're not very happy, or you're depressed or something.
If you learn how a magic trick is done, it usually diminishes your wonder at the illusion. If somebody shows you how a card trick happened, it's going to have a completely different psychological effect when you experience it subsequently.
Yes,
is that not also true?
That is true. I know people, for example, who are trained actors, and the wonderment of seeing a play, or seeing a television production is ruined by the fact that they can see, oh yeah, he forgot his line there. Because they know how it works. Or I, as a writer, can think to myself, oh yeah, I see what he did there. Yeah, he was trying to think of a synonym. because you
Yeah.
already used the word aver, and now you said advocate. Or um, that is true, but I think that's a qualitatively different thing from a religious experience, which is something that sort of takes hold of you, that's non-rational. And I think when I think of the word wonder in terms of nature, I think that's kind of what's going on. Although you may be right that certain elements within nature, their wonderment is gone. There's nothing. We don't have magical explanations now for. I'm trying to think of some of the silly old examples. The names for mushrooms are often things like weird things like harefoot or woolly foot, or these weird things that relate to magical beliefs about why they are like they are.
Mm-hmm.
At some point, people may have believed. So perhaps you could say that in a narrow sense, individual things within nature that used to all have wonder have lost their wonder, but more broadly, the luminous experience of nature is unlikely to have done so.
There's a phenomenon that surely happens where you have childhood wonder, and then you lose that, and then you become a parent, and then people talk about experience, the magic of Christmas. You're seeing it again through their eyes. You're vicariously experiencing that childhood wonder again. Is that just a part of the way that life operates, that we want our young to have this kind of wide-eyed, optimistic outlook for as long as possible, and then at some point they hit the dark reality of how the world really is, and they learn all these horrible things? I mean, if you think about how a trained like an expert biologist thinks about the natural world versus a child, the biologist is aware of a good deal more of red in tooth and claw, and animals predating on each other, and worms eating their way out of the eyes of fish and things like this. So
presumably there is something highly adaptive, because it keeps them happy, about making sure that and that's why we do it, about making sure that your child has a sense of wonder. I have a space. I don't know. Let's. I presume it's adaptive, that the child is happy, and the child is more likely to be, or within certain boundaries, and the child is more likely to be happy if it believes that it lives in a comfortable world controlled by lovely things. And also, a child.
Are happy children more likely to be conservative?
Happy people are more likely to be conservative.
Okay.
And conservative people are more likely to have been happy children.
Right. Yes, that's what I was wondering. Is in cases where your society is functional, having happy children is a pressure to perpetuate the existing order, and in cases where your society is breaking, unhappy children are more likely to rebel and change things.
I'm not sure about that, because I think that unhappy children would, if it's associated with leftism, which it seems to be, or at least ill children, it's associated with leftism, certain adult leftism. It could be that they would make things worse. But then you're right that it could be that a subsection of those unhappy children could be very right, could, let's say, be the extreme right in a woke society, and they might indirectly make things better.
Well, or perhaps unhappy children is a little bit like increasing the amount of mutations. So in a situation where you need to adapt, you want more. Is this correct? You want more variation in offspring. And in a similar way, if there's a general feeling of discontent and the children can sense that, they're more likely to try things to upturn the apple cart, which isn't helpful in a flourishing society, but is maybe necessary.
Yeah, so you're kind of getting into my woke eugenics kind of idea.
Right.
Let's think about this. This is quite interesting. If the society is functioning, then as a whole, people will be content. And ironically, people seem to be content in a society which is our evolutionary match, i.e., there's lots of death and so on, because then
Interesting.
that brings in their instincts, one of which is religiousness, which makes the death mean something. And
Yeah.
so that's when people are ironically, when they're surrounded, it's weird, but ironically, when they're surrounded by death and they're both selected to be optimally happy, not too happy, because those people might not survive in a harsh ecology, whatever, but reasonably content people. So if you take them out of that environment and you take away all the selection pressures, then you're going to have a build-up in mutation. So you're going to have more people that are probably just genetically very unhappy. That's the first thing that's going to happen, which is then going to have an environmental effect to make other people very unhappy, because it will just sort of spread, which is then going to take over the culture and push people in a maladaptive direction and make them all very unhappy, and then select for people that are genetically resistant to um, to this being unhappy, or who are able to be phenotypically resistant to it by their genes resisting it, and their parents also making them generally positive, and this makes them want to have kids and things. So in that sense, you could be right about that. And
Strikes
so
me that studying individuals, sort of sociology today, is a little bit like studying the behavior of groups of cells in a tumor, in that the behavior that we have, the relations we have, are all designed for a pre-industrial, well, probably a pre-agricultural environment, and the question is, how do people behave when you have millions of them packed into cities, and you get this kind of weird side effect behavior? But it's not really the way that the way that cells behave in a tumor is the way that cells behave in a healthy tissue, but with some weird tweaks that have caused them to multiply and ultimately will lead to the death of the organism potentially.
yes, so and so in that way, it's not a comparison to what's going on, because it seems to me that what's happening at the moment is adaptive. We have become this maladaptive species or subspecies. Woke people take all those that are remotely genetically unhealthy and pull them into a death cult and persuade them not to have children. And
Right.
only
Yeah.
those that are genetically resistant to them survive. So a better comparison is like an open wound where the bacteria eats away all the rotting flesh and it helps it to heal or something. I don't know. Does that work like that? There's
I don't know. You could imagine there being some cancer therapy where you target the cancer cells and get them to self-destruct. I'm sure there is that kind of thing. There are some cancers that
Well,
could
that's what
be
wokeness is then.
treated that way.
Wokeness is targeting
Yeah.
the cancer cells and getting them to self-destruct.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
but you raise an interesting point. We generally preserve our oldest sort of things in the young. It's quite an interesting phenomenon. So in terms of wonder, the old days, childhood, not liking change, all that sort of thing. Fairy tales, which we pass on among the young, are our oldest sort of stories that perhaps we used to tell each other. Even in language, you get this. So you have we say rabbit in adulthood, we say bunny in to children, but bunny is the old word for rabbit. Pussy is
And
the old word for cat. It's the old pre-Norman word.
in childhood and also in old age, we have quite rural accents. So we the way we speak is quite specific to. We have strong regional accents that are difficult for other people to understand, and in the middle part of our life, we standardize and end up with a more globalized form of English that more people can understand, and we revert back to it when we're.
Why do we revert back when we're old?
Well, the theory I heard was that it's a matter of professional advancement, that we change how we speak when we have to fit in, and then when we retire, we no longer need to, and we become more individualized again.
Because I've noticed both my parents have got. When I was young, my father had a posh accent, which I've inherited, and then he now speaks with a kind of Birmingham accent.
Interesting.
He's now 72.
Yes. So do you know if he had a Birmingham accent? Was he Brummy?
Well, I get the impression that when he was a child, he was from Birmingham, but then he was taught to speak, or from Southern Caulfield. He was taught to speak by his parents in this posh sort of way.
So we have this whole period in the middle of our lives where we put on a fake identity of being the nowhere people, and then we rediscover our identity in our senescence.
I don't think I ever had a London accent, though, even when I was a child. I always spoke like this because my parents spoke.
I'm similar. When I was at school, I got called posh because everyone else had a Suffolk accent. Oh, a computer, go on the tractor, and I didn't. I spoke the same way I do now. I don't know. I think my parents just sort of enforced speech codes. You don't say butter, you say butter.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, I think my parents the same. They would praise me for speaking properly.
Yeah. And here we are impressing all the Americans with our British accents, giving us, false credibility, perhaps.
Mm.
There we go. We're going to roll some more dice and see how you've done against Drowger. Good news. It's another victory, meaning that you can progress unless you were to hit another monster on the route. Let's see.
Well, then I get some more gold. Oh, you got 30 gold in pouch. I see.
Yeah, you've got another 30 gold. You were heading towards. Oh no, hang on. Where were you heading? The Superstition Swamp. Is that right?
Yeah, I'd like to go to the Word Cell Wood, please.
Yes, great. Let's do it. The Word Cell Wood is physics related. You up for some physics questions?
I've said I'll go to the Word Cell Wood, so I can't back out now.
Stick by your word. Good.
I don't really see what physics has got to do with word cells, but
that's a good point. Well, look, I'll address that later. I could probably find you a language-related question if you'd rather. But I tell you what, I haven't heard you talk about physics too often. That's not true. But
it is
true. It is true. Let's do. Okay, I'll be interested in your thoughts on. A shadow wolf has jumped out, and the shadow wolf is giving you a challenge. Can physics explain consciousness?
Well, ultimately, it can. Because if we look at if we accept E.O. Wilson's model of consilience, then any assertion that you make in psychology, i.e., there is consciousness, there is self. What is consciousness? It's self-awareness. It's being able to say, I am who I am, and I'm thinking this, and I'm feeling this, and being aware of it, rather than just feeling it instinctively and not being aware of what you're doing. And that is going to be at least partly genetic, that there would be differences in that. So people that, for example, have borderline personality disorder are often not aware of what emotions they're experiencing. And when we become aware of when we realize I am feeling anger now, when you realize that you are, then you are able via conscientiousness to kind of control it. Whereas if you don't realize that you are, you're just acting on instinct and you're just furious. And at best, you assume that you're right and you feel a deep sense of gnosis that you're right. So that's a psychological question, which is reducible to biology, i.e. genetics. Now, genetics, of course, only makes sense in terms of the chemistry. We know what genes are. They're a series of chemical elements that are stranded together and so forth, and work in certain ways, and those things only make sense in terms can only make sense in terms of the physics that underpins the chemistry, i.e., the electrons going around, whatever the nucleus is, and so on. So, in that sense, you can reduce that concept down to physics. And if you tinkered with the physics, then the chemistry would be different, and the genetics would be different, and the psychology would be different.
I've heard the argument that consciousness, as in creatures that have a view of their own first-person perspective and have a strong affinity for their personal history and strong motivation for self-preservation, things like this, that the brain conjuring the illusion of experience, of qualia, of all these subjective things that we go through day to day, has some evolutionary benefit as an explanation for why we have this rich, vivid, three-dimensional, colorful day to day. Pain feels so real and joy feels so strong.
Yeah, I'm sure it does.
But I still can't quite get the intuition that this would be real rather than just like a philosophical zombie, like a robot that if you ask ChatGPT, I'm sure you could program it up to tell you that it was conscious and to say that it felt fear of death and these kinds of things. But we all know that it doesn't. Well, I suppose some people may disagree, but it seems I think most people making the argument that humans have an evolved consciousness would say that ChatGPT does not, and ChatGPT is faking something that's quite real.
But if you have an evolved consciousness, if you are self-aware, then you will make different decisions. You will be probably more pro-social. So that becomes adaptive. If you are aware of what you're doing, then there's a degree to, and why you're doing it, then there's more of a degree to which you can control and navigate your life successfully. And part of that will be getting on with other people. And so you're less likely to be cast out by the band. Or you're more likely to literally think to yourself, how would I think if I was a woolly mammoth? Or I'd think like this, I'd think like this, I'd think like this. So you're able to perspective take. And so you can see why there would be benefits to an optimum level of consciousness. And I'd say optimum, because I think that obviously too little consciousness, you don't get those benefits. But too much consciousness, and you're ruminating all the time, and you're very aware of things like death and the future, and the possibility that the future is just oblivion. And so then that's interesting, because then that's what I think the Genesis is trying to get to grips with, this idea that perhaps there was a time where we were conscious a little bit, and then most of the time we were just and then more and more. And some people have even argued, there's a guy called Andrew Cutler has done some interesting research on this. I don't know if you've read his stuff. And he argues that snake venom, if you take it in certain small amounts, makes you self-aware. And that an antidote to snake venom is an apple juice, and that might be where what these things are alluding to. So an optimum level of consciousness. We're moving away from the physics question. Another physics question, which I think is interesting, is free will. And I think that the physics tells you there's no free will. The physics, there cannot be. There is not enough randomness in the particle physics for there to be free will. But
God doesn't play dice.
No, and if he does, he does, yes, but it's in a controlled way, such that itself is controlled.
So pseudo-random,
right?
Not a million miles different from the Gauntlet, actually.
No, perhaps not.
If you made the argument that animals evolve eyes because it's adaptive, I think that's pretty clear that if you can see at a distance, you're going to be able to evade predators and find food and all kinds of things. But that requires light to exist outside of the organism. It requires that you evolve something that's receptive to a realm beyond the creature. And there would be no use evolving eyes if there was no light. So could you argue that
David Blunkett is not self-conscious?
That barely needs an argument. If we've evolved consciousness, is that the brain connecting to a spiritual realm? Like if it was impossible for a creature to become self-aware, it wouldn't matter how adaptive it would be in theory. If it was impossible, I don't think you can kind of switch the lights on, like you were talking about, to go from non-conscious to conscious creature.
I think it would be gradual. It would be gradual. We can.
Don't you still need some mechanism? It's like if you have a
I
very
think
complicated marble
the
run.
eye would have been gradual. The eye wouldn't have just come about overnight, would it? The eye would have been gradual, little tiny little bit of ability to see, and then it got better and better and better.
But it still requires the eye, even a very basic, dim, hardly useful eye, a proto eye, is still relying on the existence of light outside of the being. The possibility for an eye pre-existed the evolution of the eye. And I guess what I'm asking is,
no, it was a random thing that happened.
Yes, it happened randomly, but it wouldn't have happened if there was no such thing as light.
Well, maybe it did. Maybe it did happen. Maybe you get mutant moles that are born with eyes, and then there's mutant moles. It's biologically expensive to have an eye, so the mutant mole is at a disadvantage, and so the mutant mole dies off.
Yeah. What I'm saying is that the ability for a creature to be conscious of its own experience, as in to genuinely. So my experience right now is it's qualitatively. Well, I can't quite put it into words, and I always feel like language fails me when I'm trying to articulate this. But the way that I'm experiencing things is so mysterious to me. Yeah. And maybe this is just a lot
of female interviewers say this to me as well, and they have trouble.
Really?
Yeah,
maybe this is my feminine side.
How they feel when they're with me, but that. Yeah. I think I know what you're trying to say. Yeah.
Well, look, I feel like I've given my best shot at trying to explain myself and failed. So I'm gonna call an audible here. Let's see if you've defeated the Shadow Wolf. Oh, we've only got 5 minutes left, so.
I better go back and bank my stuff then.
You better. I say you get back to there. Okay, good. You've got yourself another 30 gold, but it doesn't count unless you go back to Lambda Landing. So let's do that. And set that target. It's not the slickest game show I've ever attempted, but you reach for the stars. Sometimes the innovators don't get it right first time. There we are. You're back at Lambda Landing. Let's bank your gold. Banked. You've got 90 in the treasury. Do you want to do a quick jaunt out to somewhere else?
Might as well. What's down? Can we go through? What's down? Go down. What's the Dunes of Dishonesty? Can we go there?
Okay. Yes, we can go there. The Dunes of Dishonesty culture. Okay. You're on your way to the Dunes of Dishonesty when, dun dun dun, the Leviathan, a creature from, emerges from the seas and asks you the question, okay, let's do this. Can cultural artifacts be separated from their context? Does it make any sense to talk about, I don't know, you dig up a rock painting on a wall that's thousands of years old and you start evaluating whether they've done a good job or not, but you've got absolutely no clue what they were trying to achieve. Can you still say that that was a beautiful work of art that some caveman came up with?
Well, I suppose there's two ways people tend to understand beauty. One is that, it's subjective. One person finds the Virgin Mary painted in cow dung as a beautiful, and other people find it disgusting and offensive. Yeah. But that overall, there do tend to be objective standards as to what people in general regard as beautiful. And that being the case, and these are cross-cultural, and this can be shown with analyses of what kinds of faces are found beautiful, or for example. And so in that sense, you can remove a work of art from its context, and you can say it is objectively beautiful by essentially universal standards, with the certain caveats and nuances and whatever. But you can kind of do that, or you can say that it represents perhaps certain. You can read Geoffrey Chaucer's Canterbury Tales broadly and say it represents certain verities about human nature, and argue that his characters are timeless, or some of his characters anyway. Some of his characters are timeless in some way because they represent certain human types which exist now. But alternatively, that's only one reading of it. Another one is with parts of it. For example, when whatever his name is, this priest comes up to them on a hill. Is it a priest? I forget. Comes up to them on a hill, and they think he's a lollard, and there's an argument and all this. Obviously, that can only be understood within its own context, and there's lots and lots of elements of it that can only be understood within its own context. So, on some level, a book of love poetry, let's say, will be stating eternal truths. Perhaps if it's any good, anyway, it will. Something I don't know, a Shropshire lad or something. But then other elements to it, you have to understand the context in which the poet lives and the details about what he's writing about. Young boys joining up at the army or whatever.
Imagine a spaceship arrives on planet Earth in 10 years and we make first contact with this group of beings that have evolved completely separately in a different different universe. Well, let's say a different galaxy. So we have no shared culture. What are our chances of being able to find common ground culturally with them?
It's probably quite. Depends. It could be quite high. If you think that to be able to build things, it seems fairly fundamental that you have to have things like opposable thumbs. I wonder if you would have convergent evolution on other planets.
Yeah,
and maybe I'm just not having much of an imagination. Maybe
Right.
maybe there are aliens that are like jellyfish that are very.
I was going to say people argue that octopuses had a pretty good chance of being the top dog.
Well, but octopuses, one of the problems with octopuses is they don't really have culture, do they? In the sense that their mothers die giving birth to them, so they can't really be taught things. So I don't know, but it's all instinctive with octopuses in that sense. They can't pass on information to their children.
Perhaps if they overcame that, if some sequence of adaptations.
That's really fundamental, though, to octopus life.
Okay.
That's why in that film by that weird South African pervert, My Octopus Teacher, have you seen that?
I haven't.
Okay. Oh, you must watch it. He literally finds this female octopus, okay, and then he follows her around, and he literally, and I'm not exactly, he says this, he falls in love with her.
Wow.
And she starts to love him as well, and she sort of hugs him and stuff. And then eventually, the problem is that she gets a boyfriend.
Uh-oh.
An octopus boyfriend
of her own species,
of her own kind, and
that's
he
kind
knows.
Of bigoted.
And he knows, yeah, I know it is, and he knows that that's it. Once they have sex and she gets pregnant, she's ultimately going to die in the birth-giving process, and he's jealous, wow. But he loved her, but she can't pass on culture to her children, of which she has hundreds, which most of them get killed. It's a weird sort of fast life history strategy, slow life history strategy combination.
Yeah,
because they're about as intelligent as 8-year-old kids.
It would be fascinating if aliens ever do turn up. I feel like we will learn more about ourselves than we will about them.
Right, I need to go back to the bank now. I need to go back to the bank.
Good point. Let's see if you've defeated the Leviathan. Battle is happening. What do you reckon? Have you managed it?
I don't know.
You've defeated it, the final hurdle.
It's almost like I thought that would happen. I'd had this run of luck.
You didn't have any gold in your pouch, so in many ways, it doesn't matter. And perhaps in death, nothing matters either way. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the Gauntlet, Ed. And you've made a valiant effort, and yeah, we will see at the end of the series how you've landed on the leaderboard.
Excellent. Well, I still presume that there's 45 seconds where I can go somewhere else.
Yeah, do you want to head back to the landing? Yeah, I'll bring it up, and I will then click stop recording when we hit timeout. So where do you fancy going?
Where am I at the moment?
You're at Lambda's Landing. Look, your character's just walking back there now.
Why? No, I want to carry on.
Oh, you want to? You died. You can't.
Did I
carry
die?
on.
Oh, I thought I was just defeated. Oh, I see.
You were defeated. Well. You lose your gold. You head back to Lambda's Landing.
So it's not like it's like in Grand Theft Auto 5, where when you get killed, you end up in hospital always.
You respawn. Yeah, that's right.
You lose money. Yeah,
you've got beaten up. The bad monsters have taken you.
I was thinking of playing that this weekend actually, because my wife and my kids have gone to their mother-in-law's for Vapu for this May celebration. I don't celebrate it because I'm English. So I was thinking, of having a good go on the old GTA 5 this weekend.
Nice.
Yeah, see if I can sort out that map that you collect. I've never done that one.
Well, you've been handling this map with aplomb. So
I like that segue. I was thinking if I say that, he'll go for that segue, which I think is
you set me up. Nice. I hit them down all night. Great. Thanks, Ed.
Thanks a lot. Bye bye.